Welcome to this latest video on the fantastic Get and Transform Data feature from Microsoft Excel. I'm Mark Brockbank. I'm one of the senior trainers here at QA working in the desktop applications and user platforms area. And we're going to be looking at this in this 30-minute video, taking you through from a scenario through the cleansing right through to final use back in Excel. So the Get and Transform Data feature, relatively new to Excel, first seen in the 2013 version as an add-in called Power Query. Since then, it's been included as part of the Data tab in the 2016, 2019, 2021, and of course the subscription cloud-based Excel 365. Not available in the lighter web version, so this would only be part of the desktop version of the Excel software. We use it to create connections to all sorts of different data sources. They can be databases, websites, as you can see by the screenshot there, a number of different areas potentially. In this video, we're going to look at the relatively simple idea of actually connecting to another Excel file, but using it in a really clever way to clean the data, improve the data, create additional columns of data, reorder the data, and even filter it, as we'll see. And the beauty of this is that these steps that we will do as part of the initial connection and data cleansing are then remembered, kept in a sequential order, and then refreshed each time we want to use this data. So this can take over the role of previous programming and code and manual work. For those that are familiar with Power BI Desktop, you will have seen the Power Query Editor feature before, and therefore skills are transferable between those two and other platforms that use the same Power Query Editor. In our scenario, we're going to look at a situation where Excel data is currently imported manually on a weekly basis. In doing that, we have to go through various data cleansing processes to remove unwanted columns. We have to tidy up some rogue spaces in front of the first names. We have to create additional columns for a postcode prefix and a postcode town, and then filter it for just the England data, removing the Aberdeen data. North of the border, please don't be offended. It's just for the purpose of the video. The columns are then reordered, and the final output needs to be ready for pivot table analysis. So at the moment, as a manual process, that would involve things like deleting columns, trim functions to remove spaces, find, search, left, right, mid functions to use to get the postcode prefix in the town, or failing that, in the modern era, maybe flash fill, and in days gone by, perhaps text to columns. But they would both then need further work to get rid of the bits we don't need, add the bits we do need, and there would still be a number of steps. A filter, yeah, it could be done with the drop down arrows and so on, but then that would again have to be performed every week, and the columns then moved around in the order. Think how that might upset things like a VLOOKUP if they're not done the same way. You know, what was column 10 last week's now column 7. Nightmare scenario. And this is why for years only certain people have undertaken the role of doing these kind of jobs for fear of getting it wrong. And what happens when that person's off? So when this is done manually, it's a tough ask. What we're going to see across these videos is the idea that Get and Transform Data will do all this for us, remember the steps, apply them every week, and put it in the hands of pretty much any user who can click a button having opened the file. Absolutely magic. So this is our raw data. We are now going to look to transform this data, get this data into another file, our other file being this one here,
called transformed data. So effectively what we're trying to achieve is grab the raw data, eliminate some of the columns. We're going to lose employee code, we're going to lose the phone numbers, we're going to lose the blank total salary column, we don't need the car column, we don't need anything beyond column P, and we don't need anything below row 153. We're going to filter it so it doesn't have the Aberdeen data in. We're going to split the employee code so we have both the prefix and just the letters at the beginning, as they may well be useful in some data analysis. And we'll also do some work with the dates to turn those into an additional month name only column. We will also remove the rogue spaces that you might be able to see there at the beginning of each of the first names in the forename column. So these are things that we're planning to do when we run through our get and transform data.
So in the next part of the video, we're going to see where we get the data, in this instance from another Excel file. But please note, data can be retrieved from all manner of sources, including CSV text files, databases, websites, cloud areas such as AWS and Azure and similar, and Google sources, even PDFs, JSON, and many third-party sources can also be used to grab the data from.
So here we are in the transformed data file. Currently nothing in there. We aim to grab the data and then take it through the transformation stages to give us our tidy, reusable raw data ready for analysis. So at this stage, we're going to look at the getting of the data, and we would do that in Excel 2016 onwards from the data tab. And on the left hand side there, we will see the get data and transform data area. A number of different sources of data can be utilized. So we would see the ability to bring it in from files such as other Excel files, as we'll do here, but also traditional files like text and CSV, maybe data that's been scraped from websites, JSON files, even PDFs that contain tables, as well as SharePoint. Databases, Access databases, SQL databases, IBM and Oracle databases, Azure, so cloud data, our own QA limited, restricted data, other online services, and this could be Salesforce, Dynamics, and a whole range of other sources, usually the ODBC and the OLEDB giving us a lot of access to non-Microsoft vendor neutral data sources, and of course the very valuable idea of grabbing anything from the web. Not covered in these videos, but the ability to also pull together multiple sets of data, merge them in terms of extra columns being merged on the end, but also appended where extra rows are added on underneath. Imagine a situation where data is provided on individual files regionally. So it could be a north file, a south file, an east file, and a west file. And we want to append those to create one national file with all the data added underneath to create one big list. And crucially, we can always come back into what we'll see the Power Query editor at any stage if we need to modify, change the order, or reassess the process. So let's get some data here from our Excel file. It might seem strange to bring Excel data into Excel, but it's the passing through where we can transform it which is going to be crucial. But let's look at the get data steps. So from workbook, And here, transform data is where I'm bringing it into it. Raw data is the other part. It doesn't need to live in the same folder. It just needs to be accessible to the file so it can live in different areas of the network, OneDrive locations, etc. I'm going to choose my raw data file. I'm going to choose import, and we'll see the connection process taking place. So just prior to connection, a good way of working with this so that we can avoid problems associated with extra columns on the right, maybe extra data further below our important data list, is to, in the ideal world, have it as an Excel table. So let's quickly show that step. I'm clicking into my data, insert table. We could go home tab, format as table. Control T, as we'll see, could also be used. In this case, it's picking up A1 to 0153. My table has headers. Yes, it does. Row 1 clearly marked as headings. And then I can change the appearance to anything simple, taking off features that I don't wish, but ultimately making it a table. And we know it's a table by the fact the table design tab appears at the top. To make it a little bit easier to distinguish in the connection process, I'm going to rename the table. So that's on the table design tab and on the left hand side. And one from the database days that people will recognize, giving it a TBL prefix. And that will do us. I'm now going to save and close that file. And now within transform data, I intend to now go and get that raw data. So I'm going to go to get data from file Excel workbook, point it to the raw data file. And initially it seems like an import, but as we'll see, it's more of a connection. And there straight away is the navigator screen. What we can see here is the table that I've just created, but also the sheet name and all these unnamed ranges that exist for the individual columns. So if I was just looking to pull in a particular column, I could do that. I can select multiple items. In this case, I'm going to go for the table I've just created. And crucially here, rather than assuming it's good to be loaded straight away, we're going to look at the crucial transform data steps. Transform data now takes me into the all-important Power Query editor screen. And it's here that all the magic will happen.
So this next part's the biggie. This is where the whole transformation takes place. And this is all done in the Power Query editor. This is the part that was previously an add-on in Excel and is now embedded behind the Excel software. The steps we're going to see in this video include promoting the headings to the top, assessing and potentially modifying data types, removing and reordering the columns, creating custom columns, cleaning up data, filtering the underlying data before it gets to Excel, potentially merge and append data sources. So if we had multiple Excel files that needed blending together as one, think about the process of being able to pivot multiple data sources as one, very much how Power Pivot back in the day and the relationships area of front-end Excel might work now. This can be done as part of the transform data instead. And most importantly, any of these steps can be modified at any stage. So if we get something slightly wrong, or we need to change the source and the file path of where the data is coming from, all that can be done, and so much more. Remember, this video is just about an introduction to the feature. This is going to grow and grow over the next few years.
So having now connected to the data, this is the point where we use the Power Query editor behind the scenes of Excel, a feature that some may know from working behind the scenes of Power BI, the Power Query add-ins of earlier versions, and generally speaking, the Power Query features supported by Microsoft. The setup is similar to an Excel Microsoft product in that we've got tabs across the top, many features on the Home tab, Transform for transforming existing columns. Note some features are both available as a transform for an existing column, so keep your eye on date and time, for example, but also when we add new columns, we can create new columns and see similar features. As for view, just a few things there, including the fact that I've got the formula bar switched on here so that you would see the formula language, which we know as M, not to be confused with maybe Power BI formula language and Excel formula language. DAX, you might be familiar with the terminology in Power BI, and of course our normal Excel front-end syntax. So our job here, if we remind ourselves, is to remove some columns. But what I want to point out to everyone is this right-hand side where we have these applied steps. And we've already got 3 steps in there. The source of where the file comes from, which should I need to amend at a later point, the little cog icon that you might just make out there can be clicked onto, and a browse can take place to point it to a different file in the future. In other words, if the original source file moves or changes name. Navigation steps, that would be the specific set of data. So do I now want to point it to a different part, or is it always going to be TBL staff? And then an assessment takes place by Power Query Editor of what are the most suitable data types for all the columns. And this can be seen at the tops of the columns, ABC 1, 2, 3, suggesting a general data type, as you'll see for many of these, general data type, and so on, going across. So we may well be looking at data types to be used for example, date of birth, and further over, next review has been date and time. Some of them text, some of them monetary, so therefore number, and some columns we obviously don't need. So let's look at manipulating a few data types first of all. For example, let's tell it that the surname is definitely going to be text. Not general, but text. And if we happen to have the applied steps clicked onto an earlier point, it will warn you about inserting a step because it will be trying to add it here between navigation and change type. And therefore, best practice often is to make sure that we click on the last step before we do any further processing. That is assuming that you want the steps to follow on sequentially from the last point. Obviously, if we need to insert a step at an earlier point, that's exactly what the panel on the right can be used for, and the X used to delete any steps, very much like a glorified undo. So by this point in change type, we can now see that it's made its own assessment and sees employee code as text, staff number as numerical, text. So it's gone from its assumptions about general at that stage to now its own assumptions. And remember, we haven't done anything yet. So therefore, I don't seemingly need to make too many changes to the data types, the text, the numbers, and crucially, date of birth. And next review picked up as date and time. So let's remove some columns. We've been told we don't need the employee code, so I'm going to click the whole column, and on my Home tab, because it's one of the more common features, remove the column. That goes in as a step over on the right. But if I carry on by removing some more columns at the same time, it will just get kept in the same one step. We won't see remove columns listed for each separate one unless we do something else in between. So in this case, it's been decided that we don't need the phone number. So I'm going to remove the column. And as you can see, no further step has been applied. It's essentially doing it all in that same step. Total salary, remove column. And we'll say that we don't need the car column either. So remove column. And what you can see up here in what is effectively the formula bar, that's the M language. Be glad we don't have to write it, guys. It's doing it all for you. Written by us just picking things from a graphical user interface at the top. If the headings hadn't already been promoted to the top, we can tell it to do that. So lots and lots of lovely features, some of which we won't get into on this short video, but certainly on later videos. So we've now got rid of the columns that people decided they didn't need. Let's remove those preceding spaces from the forenames. Every one of those forenames has got a space in front of it. Rather than doing anything clever with adding columns, splitting, anything like that, in this case, because it is the one and only space in all those forenames, let's click the column and let's use a simple find and replace. So replace values, value to find, typing in a space, replace with nothing. Do we need any advanced options? No, in this case, there's no special characters or matching of the entire cell contents. So let's get on with it and OK it. And that now has removed the spaces from the forename column and added it as a step over on the right. Just to give you that precursor to the applied steps, they're the steps that will get applied sequentially every time somebody refreshes this in the front-end Excel file. It'll go to the source file, it'll perform the navigation, change the types, remove the columns, replace the space with nothing, and carry on with any other steps. Let's add the postcode prefix. So for the employee postcode, this time let's go to add column, and we're going to have first look at using what we call a column from examples. If anyone's seen flash fill in front-end Excel, you'll recognize this feature. So I'm going to do it from the selection, the employee postcode column that I've already chosen. And over on the right, it now becomes my job just to type in the beginnings of the postcode. So in this case, S3. And it's already now picking out all the other ones, NW2, AB6, etc. As you can see in that column. And what it's effectively doing there, again, is turning our graphical user interface into an M language formula, text before delimiter, text before the space. OK that. And then I'll rename that column, click the column, and back either on the Home tab or on the Transform tab, we'll have the rename option. Rename it in this case, post code prefix, and that data type as text can stay as it is. But let's do another one now, and this time let's add a column by first of all duplicating the column, but then effectively transforming it, removing the numbers off the end. So a little bit of a different spin on this, various ways you could do it, but I'm going to duplicate the postcode prefix column. We'll rename it in a second, but now rather than adding column, I'm transforming the one I've got. So I'm going to go to my Transform tab, And what I'm going to do here is now split the column. And I'm going to split it not on a delimiter. We're not looking for a space or a comma, but I'm going to split this by where it goes from non-digit text letters to digit. So in other words, split S and 3, NW and split off the 2, AB and split off the 6. And what we now have on the right is one with the numbers and one just with the text. I don't need the number one, so I can choose that. And whereas I can go and find features at the top, we obviously just found rename, we found duplicate. A lot of the features are also in the right click list as well. So in this case, I'm going to remove that column. And I'm going to right click and I'm going to rename the column. I'm going to call it postcode town. Let's do something now with the date and time field, which is next review. So again, I'm going to suggest that we add a column by duplication. But now with that column, I'm going to transform it and using some of the date and time examples, and these are lovely. I could do a quick age, I could just do the date only, which is obviously what we got, split out the year, split out the month, the quarter, the week. In this case, I want the month, but I want the name of the month. So I'm transforming the duplication of the next review column to just be the name of the month. So that first one should end up October, second one January, third one November, etc. And I'm going to rename that one. Next review, month name. And notice these are all going in as steps over here on the right. Since we did our find and replace on the spaces, we've now added all these steps looking at splitting the postcode, renaming, duplication, splitting on non-digit to digit, removing the column we no longer needed, another duplication, extracted the month name, renamed it, all steps that will get repeated sequentially each time the data is refreshed. Let's position these columns, not that we need to, but just for the front-end user experience. We probably want postcode fields to be alongside the postcode fields, so we'll move those along. We probably want next review alongside the next review, so we'll move those along. Reordered columns. You can rename any of the steps, so if we wanted to rename a step, so for example the replaced values, I'm just going to rename that step just to make it easier to understand. Remove preceding space on forename. Probably a little bit long, but you get the idea. And that would make it a bit easier for anyone reading this afterwards. Let's do one final bit just to show we can. Let's say in our own front-end version of the data, we only want the English locations, which would be Sheffield, London, and Milton Keynes, and therefore eliminate Aberdeen. So very similar to the Excel front-end filters, we've got drop-downs at the top. I'm going to take Aberdeen out, OK it. Oops, that's ended up in there. Meant to be at the bottom, as I said, always add on at the bottom, so I'm dragging it down to the bottom and I'm going to rename that step. Remove Aberdeen. Could do that with any of the steps, of course. So there we have it, the transformation steps, ready to now pop into Excel in the front end and manipulate from there.
So having done the big stuff, it's now time to take the glory. We're going to pop it from Power Query Editor now back into Excel. In this instance, we're going to see it load into an Excel table, and then we would create the pivot table, but it can be dropped straight into a pivot table, or you can simply create a connection, and that would be particularly useful with large data sources that might either slow down Excel or, even in extreme circumstances, go beyond Excel's limits of rows and columns. What a mighty data source that would be. We'd be glad of the connection.
So having transformed all the data, tidied it all up, cleaned it up, we're now going to drop it back into Excel. So that's simply the Home tab. Here in Power Query Editor, close and load. Close and load 2 would make a sensible first choice. That way we get to specify where to load the results to. And you'll see here it drops us back into our Excel file now with various offerings. We can add it as a table, we can start to create a pivot table or go straight to the pivot chart, or if it was perhaps too big maybe to manipulate in Excel or even work within Excel, we could be creating just a connection. Of course, with this being Excel data, no chance it's going to be too big, but think about that with databases, cloud-based source, web data. Is it too big to actually bring into Excel? In which case, just a connection will do. In this case, we're going to add it to a table, and we're going to add it to the existing worksheet, cell A1, and OK. Data is pulled through, panel on the right for the queries and connections, but have a look, employee code gone. Spaces at the beginning of first names gone. Additional columns for prefix and town created, and the month name. Over on the right, no additional stray columns. The car column's gone. The blank total salary column's gone. The phone numbers are gone. And no Aberdeen data. I can now manipulate that in Excel, add in pivot tables. So summarize with a pivot table. Let's go for it. I might want to look at postcode town and count staff numbers. Done. I might want to look at reviews by month, in which case insert pivot table, review by month name, and again we'll do staff number, and we'll change it to count again. Custom sort on that in the raw data, Excel front end feature. But again, that would not include any Aberdeen data. We could prove it by bringing the location into the columns, London, Sheffield, Milton Keynes. Again, a custom sort on that to put London, head office first. Here, again, prove it. Location is a column. Postcodes, lots of London postcodes. Sheffield, pretty much one postcode prefix. Same in Milton Keynes. But quite a few different ones, including some a bit further away, CW Crew, NE Newcastle, big commuters there into London. That's what we're analysing. Could rename the sheets and all that.
And now, just to really put the cherry on top of the cake, so to speak, once that whole process is created, we'll show in the next video how we refresh it to pull through new data, how we can auto refresh it on a time basis, brilliant for websites that are constantly being changed or updated, or live data, and perform all the steps sequentially, potentially modify any individual steps when required. And all together, we're going to save on those regular, repetitive, predictable tasks and not a single bit of programming was needed. VBA isn't dead, macros aren't dead, but transform data is certainly going to take a lot of the heavy lifting, I would guess.
Finally, we're going to have a look at renewing it, refreshing it, reusing the data source. So obviously, as we said, no Aberdeen data in there at the moment. But also, if we look at the staff numbers in order, last one, 2147. So we're going to add another member of staff in a new location that isn't Aberdeen, in a new department, maybe a new postcode, and we'll do that in the raw data. We'll come in here and refresh it. So I'm going to open up the raw data file. Wait for it to come in. There we go. It is a table, so I can happily add on at the bottom. Remember, the raw data will still have the employee codes, the spaces in the first names, the phone numbers, the total salary, no extra column for any postcode or review fields. So let's create one here. I'm going to start with a number of 3000. You might notice the last one before was 2147. We weren't seeing 2150 because we'd filtered out Aberdeen. I'm going to pop myself in there, Brockbank. I'm deliberately going to put the space in, not that I have to. And we'll have them working in the training department. And we'll have them in our previously unlisted Manchester department with a postcode of M1 1 AA, date of birth, 1st of the 1st. I'm not really born on New Year's Day. 1972. That bit might be correct. And salary. Let's hit those 6 figures. Next review, control semicolon, today's date. And do I want a pension? Yeah. Do I need a car? No. Not that we're including that column anyway. And I'll just create myself a little employee code, T for training, MA for Manchester, 3000. Just tidy up that bottom row. And when we've done that, we're ready to refresh again. So I will save the changes. It works better if you save. And I'll now close that file. So remember, we're expecting a new employee, not there at the moment. No employee 3000. The pivot table's not showing any Manchester postcodes or Manchester locations. And December, when my review is due, currently on 9, and obviously nothing for Manchester. In here, the crucial thing, when I click in here, and when I go to my query tab or even my data tab and refresh is refreshing that one table, refresh all any other data sources I might be using. So it doesn't matter here because I'm only using the one. We're going to choose refresh. And that will now perform all those applied steps. Go through, grab the data, split it, add the columns, add the next review column, remove spaces. Let's see if we've now got a new employee, Mark Brockbank, employee 3000 in Manchester. Pivot tables, well, they need refreshing as well. So let's refresh those. New location in Manchester, new Manchester postcode. And the other one gets refreshed at the same time because we've now got 10 reviews in December, including a Manchester one. All those steps performed in literally seconds without us having any programming, without us having to have any great front-end knowledge of what it does. If there are tweaks that need to be made, we can make them, and we'd look at that in later videos. But that is a huge time saver. gets the data, transforms the data, drops it into Excel, and we can even refresh it and reuse it daily, weekly, multiple times a day, whenever suits. Hope that's useful, guys.
So in summary, if we've not solved this already, I don't know what more we can do, guys. This new process now, grabbing the data from the Excel files, replacing the old manual import or opening and copying and pasting. Not only that, but we're manipulating and tidying and cleaning the data. We're filtering it for just what we want and not having to do that in front-end Excel. We're dropping it into Excel, and then any front-end analysis such as pivot tables and charts, conditional formatting can then take place. Improvements, probably obvious, but let's talk about them. Speed and efficiency. We're going to reduce errors. People will run the same thing just by refreshing it, and therefore continuity. Everyone will do it the same way. It'll improve on the user base who can do these skills, so we'll be able to incorporate a wider breadth of users, and staff morale improves. Might be an undersold point, but if one poor soul has to do this manually every week, but now anyone can do it, there's massive benefits to be seen there. Other little points of interest that you might want to pick up on: no programming or VBA required, so no longer are we reliant on that person with the VBA experience and keeping them sweet so they never leave our organization. And it can be refreshed and reused by pretty much anybody easily and automatically. And most crucially, if we've got Excel 2016 or newer, we've already got the features there. We don't need to purchase any new software. We don't really even need to massively train anybody. We just need people who can set up the initial get and transform steps, and everyone else can reap the benefits. That, guys, is a game changer. Thanks for viewing. Visit our website at www.qa.com for more information about courses and up and coming courses and the rest of our fabulous portfolio of Excel courses. Catch you soon.